backyard, it has no purpose. It's really ugly and it's annoying. The cool thing about this, and it's not super magnetic, but when you hold a magnet up against it, you do feel, because there is such a high iron content in clinkers, you can actually feel that there is a resistance. If you do decide to go exploring and you have metal detectors in your areas, one of the things to be mindful of, especially if it's just a basic metal detector, is that clinkers show up with metal detectors. So you have to have one that's very changeable. Otherwise, you'll just be finding them all over the place. And that would kind of spoil the adventure just by finding rocks. I have lots of other goodies and things to explore, but I want to turn it back over to Ray so he can talk about some of the other things in the area. Hopefully. Thank you. With a working microphone.
I hope it's working. We'll find out. Okay, down here. Okay. I think I need one of those headphone things.
Get it working again.
You did? Okay, good.
Sorry, Jamie, we missed about half the year.
Start over. I think it'll come through on the tape, though. Watch it. Yeah, watch on the tape. Okay, thank you, Jamie. We appreciate that. I just have a few other miscellaneous examples of things. Besides things falling down cliffs towards rivers. Coming back to this for a minute, okay? So the Hoy-Unterkircher buildings, which are the pharmacy building, or sometimes called Arbeiter Hall, because the German society met above, is the current pharmacy, which is now for sale. And the owners are attempting to get another pharmacy type business to come in the front of that store. But the other day, a couple weeks ago, they allowed Sue and I and Dave Renner to go up and see the second and third floors of that building. And the point of that is you can find really interesting artifacts, trash, in our old buildings downtown, if you can get in there. So I brought this one up here in particular because we talked about John Kingsley and his role in businesses. And if you go onto the second floor of that pharmacy building and you go to the back of the building, there's a storage room back there that apparently has always been a storage room since the 1860s. And in that storage room, people have written on the walls, all over the walls, from the 1860s to the 1940s. We believe it was last occupied in the 1940s. Actually, when the high school changed over here on City Road and the new high school was being built, the students met in classrooms all over town in different buildings. And so in that building, on the second floor, we found this. Some nice piece of artwork. It's a painting. October 6, 1877. And it says Kingsley and Lewis. Kingsley's very clear. Lewis is a little bit hard to read, but we finally figured it out. Here is another portrait of John Hampton Kingsley, done in 1877. It's a side view. Guy smoking a pipe. Okay, the date's on there. Looks a little bit, might say Neanderthalish in this view. But if you go back to that earlier picture there and kind of look at him and figure to turn the head, what would you see? Okay, that seems to work out. And so we went and found a Manchester enterprise about October 6, 1877. And sure enough, John Kingsley and Charlie Lewis ran a perfumery business in that building. They manufactured perfume. Unfortunately, Jamie's got some little sample bottles of perfume holders here. And Kingsley's doing all this stuff. I mean, if you look at his history, and we'll talk about him in one of our programs next year, he's doing all sorts of stuff. And in addition to running the drugstore, he's running a perfumery business upstairs. And Charlie Lewis was his partner. And this is painted on that wall. Somebody spent some time doing this painting on there. And they split up. I mean, Charlie Lewis was a guy that jumped all over the place, but Charlie Lewis is famous in Manchester history for running a celery farm. He was big into celery. So if he bought celery from 1880s through about 1910, came from his farm. So we really enjoyed the chance to see this painting up close. I mean, they even got, he's got his glasses on here, and these kind of treasures, nobody knows about them. They're sitting up there in the building. So I intend to ask the owners if they then sell the building, because the plan is to convert the second and third floors into apartments. There's really no demand for retail on second and third floors downtown, but apartments are totally booked up. And so the thought is that somebody will buy the pharmacy building. The first floor will still be some sort of a pharmacy, maybe we'd call it a pharmacy depot rather than an actual pharmacy store. But there's a couple of floors will be apartments, and we would like the chance to come in there and somehow, with a saw, cut out that painting on the wall. Okay, so we'll talk with them about that. But all over that wall are all sorts of things, and that's kind of what the second floor looks like. So the storage room is in the back of this building here, but hasn't been occupied since the 1940s to the best of the current owner's knowledge. And there's just little piles of stuff all over. They did donate to us a bunch of books. So we're finding from the stores downtown, whether it's the pharmacy building or the Worth Repeating store now, which is been a business since the late 1860s. You find in the basement or tucked in a corner somewhere, these are the ledger books in this case here from Marks and Marks downtown, and this one's running 1924, so it's almost 100 years old. So we are finding all sorts of artifacts, neat trash stuff downtown in buildings. Okay, the Village Green. The Village Green was set up, what's now Worcester Park, in 1833 by John Gilbert as a meeting place. And fortunately, Manchester is one of the very few towns where the meeting place, the Village Green, has survived. The idea was that the wealthy owners would have homes around the Village Green, and the churches would be around the Village Green. And the reason I put this up here is that a couple of years ago, there were a couple of gentlemen going through town with a metal detector, and they were walking through Worcester Park, finding all sorts of stuff, digging up the park. Ugh. Village didn't like that. They kind of got lectured about, you don't go into Village Park and start digging it up, finding all sorts of stuff. But basically, if you walked around anywhere in town, by the old houses, out in parks like this, with a metal detector, you're going to find stuff. It's interesting what you can find. This view is taken from the top of Ann Arbor Hill. I point that way over there, where the water tower is now. And it's showing trash. This is not a very good print, but the business owners downtown, there's no garbage pickup, there's no sewers, throw it out back. And this is a topic that Matt Blosser, the publisher of the Enterprise, editorialized about for several decades. People just throwing trash out and letting it rot. And what this picture shows, here's where M52 is coming down. This is the railroad track coming through. And if you get a better image of a print, you'll see all sorts of stuff just thrown out there. What if you walked in back of those stores downtown now, where they're not paved over, and went through, you could find all sorts of interesting things back there. Kirk Park began as a dump. So if you look at the original plat maps of Manchester from the 1830s, you see Main Street platted, you see Railroad, or what's now Adrian Street platted, and then suddenly there's this big gap behind the south side of downtown where there's nothing platted at all, because it was just a big swampy dump back there. A creek ran through it, and people would just throw their trash in back downtown and let it sit back there. So Matt Blosser wrote many articles about smells, diseases, what they could understand about diseases coming from garbage. Disgraceful part of the neighborhood. He's editorializing like mad about that stuff. And people would throw things in the river. So upstream on the River Raisin were a couple of slaughterhouses. So they would throw the carcasses and stuff down there. So people are trying to swim in the river, and here comes the remains of pieces of things floating down the river. Again, kind of making it not a very nice place to go swim. And so we have about 3 decades worth of articles where Blosser was banging on the village council, get some ordinances, get something done with the sewers. And quite often these downtown businesses would build a sewer from their building right across the land into the River Raisin. Everything just flow right in the river. And here he is writing one of his editorials about the problems with trash ending up in the river. That was a big problem they had back then. And even Don Limpert, when he bought the mill, 1970s, he discovered strange little plants growing down by the river one day, and he analyzed it, and it was still an old sewer drain coming from one of the buildings downtown into the river Raisin right down there by the mill. And these plants were loving what was coming in, growing there, but he discovered this open sewer that nobody had ever capped off and figured out. So stuff was still in the 1970s flowing from the buildings or the houses directly into the river. This is an editorial cartoon he put in about trash. He had all these images of death and destruction and weird things coming in. So I found this cartoon in Enterprise one time where he's really pushing for it, and just got to be kind of interesting. A couple more examples real quick. Back to rural. Bemis Road, if you know where Bemis is a really critical road in early Michigan history. Bemis Road, which is north and east here, basically it runs west from Eisman Road over into the corner here of Sharon, Manchester, Bridgewater, and Freedom Township. And then there's about a 3/4 mile gap where the county filled it in back in the 1940s, and it continues east. Bemis Road was the dividing line between the Monroe Land Office and the Detroit Land Office. So if you were a settler coming out of New York or coming out of Germany, back in the 1820s till about the 1870s, the U.S. government was selling land. And if you came into the Monroe Land Office, you would buy land in Manchester Township or Bridgewater Township because they were south of Bemis Road, which was the dividing line between the two land offices. If you got land in Freedom Township or Sharon Township, you were north of Bemis, you came into the Detroit Land Office. And what it meant was that in the beginning, first 30 years or so, settlers coming in through the Detroit Land Office would not know settlers coming in through the Monroe Land Office. It just depended where you got off the boat or where your carriage ended up or whatever. And the government had an idea to build basically a superhighway down that line from the edge of Washtenaw County all the way over to Lake Erie, or Lake St. Clair. And so Bemis Road was quite famous back in those days as a place to be on that section line. The piece between Eisman and Ernst is now closed off. And if you walk down, you can walk down there now. It's kind of a neat trail. You see an old cemetery there from the 1830s. And there was a house back down there a ways. And here's a great midden. Somebody left a 1958 Chevrolet there. And it's been sitting there since then. It took me a little while to kind of look at all the trim and figure out the pieces, but I got it down to 1958. It's been sitting there. And that's an example of another type of rural midden that's just kind of sitting out there in the middle of nowhere. And it's got its usual assortment of bottles and other stuff there. But again, primarily alcohol bottles. You won't find any china back in here. Nothing fancy back here. It's just, this was rural life. And finally, one last example. A few years ago, we were approached by a man who was descended from a John Paul, which is right here, again in Freedom Township. And this is Bemis Road running right along here. And that part of Bemis is open between Ernst and Schneider. And he wanted to find his ancestors' farmstead. So quickly we could able to find out his ancestors. Great-great-grandfather was John Paul. And they show in the plat map, here's where the farm was. Because they always showed a little house with a little orchard, kind of cultivated orchard around it. And that's where his farmstead was. But if you go out there on Bemis Road and you look up, there's nothing there anymore. You just see field, open field. And we have discovered through the Map Washtenaw system that the Washtenaw County puts out, they have the aerial photographs online from Map Washtenaw. The most current version is 2018. They're colored, they're extremely detailed. You can really zoom in on them. And if you look at the aerial photograph for that particular location, you see this. Okay? Now it doesn't look like much from here, and it's hard to see, but if you look closely, right here, there's a perfect rectangle. It's what we call a ghost image. We've done a lot of ghost image research for people. the aerial photograph shows where the ground was compressed, or a foundation is still there, or something's there altering the appearance of the soil. And so we could locate exactly where the farmstead was. You put your cursor on your computer over that, and it gives you the GPS reading, the 6 digits. Put that GPS reading into your smartphone. You walk out there, off Bemis Road, and ding, there you are. And when you get there on the site, you can then see the remains of the foundation. You can see trash. And all of this is basically trash that over the years has kind of migrated out from the house. This guy was so thrilled that he found the residue of his great-great-grandfather's house. And we go talk to the current owner, get permission to walk up in there and take photographs. So ghost images is another way that we use to find Middens in the area. So that's basically our talk. Thank you for coming. And we have refreshments available that Nancy Feldkamp and Kathleen Grady provided for tonight. I think there's something I can remind you about. The program survey list back there. Memberships, if you haven't renewed your membership, it's back there in the back table. And that's it for tonight. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Enjoy the goods.
Right?
Oh, okay. I'll do that.